chaotic game in the Premier League has resulted in Newcastle United beating Manchester City 2-1. There are three key things I want to look at in today's analysis video through the use of stills from the game and my tactics board. I want to talk about City's very good attacks throughout the game, but lacklustre finishing. Why was that the case, and what examples were there? The questionable build-up from City and why that was such an issue for City in the game, and how Newcastle were able to put City under pressure in that sense. And then finally, Newcastle's very good offensive work, their very good chance creation. How were they so efficient with their chance creation? And conversely, why was City so suspect and so easy to bypass when they were off the ball? Speaking of off the ball, Newcastle in their 4-5-1, as I outlined in the tactical preview, the key weakness of this structure for Newcastle is the space in between their defensive and midfield line is so easy to exploit, and City were able to do that time and time again in the match. I've got loads of examples to go through. City, on the other hand, when they went off ball, this is what I thought was going to be the case, because this is how we set up against Bournemouth. But what actually happened was Bernardo and Foden swapped places for that first half. And in the really early phases for City, we saw City go back to what worked against Liverpool with a slight twist. So it was that diamond structure where Nico's at the base, Bernardo at the tip, Doku, Cherki either side, but instead of it being Foden left, Haaland right, it was actually the other way round, and that did carry over to Foden being off-ball right of centre in midfield when City reverted to their 4-3-3/4-1-4-1 when Newcastle were more advanced up the pitch. I'm not 100% sure as to why City did that. I believe in the same way that against Liverpool, the key was you had Foden here, Haaland there, so that Haaland could pin Van Dijk. Foden can push onto Konate. That forces Liverpool to go direct and build up down their ineffective right. I wonder if by switching them, the idea from Guardiola was let's try to force Newcastle to build up down their left, because Cher is a right-footed left centre-back. Nick Pope is right-footed, so going to his left is going to be weaker. So perhaps the idea was that Newcastle's build-up structure is going to be weaker going down their left, so try to force them down their left. As we'll explore, that wasn't necessarily ideal on the ball, because it did mean that Foden and Cherki were almost standing on one another's toes at times, and they were almost being tasked with the same role. I don't think it was ideal. I much prefer Foden left of centre. This is another one of those games that has illustrated that. That's to come. That's the background. But there were a lot of good attacks in the game from City, and this is going to be further exploring an issue for Newcastle that they've had all season. If I, Nobbins, a fool, am able to identify this weakness and say in the tactical preview, City should target the pockets, and indeed that's what we ended up doing, then of course Premier League managers and of course Guardiola is also going to be able to identify this. So this is a big question for Eddie Howe going throughout the season. How is he going to address that issue? It's a very passive 4-5-1 mid-block from Newcastle. The way to exploit it is to simply occupy the gaps. Foden's positioning in that first half was a lot higher than it has been against Liverpool and Bournemouth. More often than not in this first half, City were actually building up with this 2-2 structure rather than the 2-3. Foden being asked to get into the pockets along with Doku, Cherki and here, and in this instance, Haaland as well. So Foden's not being asked here to be the bridge, connecting the deeper midfield to the attack. There's the passive 4-5-1. That's going to come back to haunt Newcastle later. So with this chance, for example, Foden actually drifts to the left of centre. He's a much better playmaker there when he's playing off that left side. Receives it from Nico. He looks up and he can see that there's one of his teammates occupying the pockets. Fantastic ball. First time in to Cherki, that is. City have immediately bypassed Newcastle's midfield with just one ball. That's far too easy for City. Same situation here. Doku. Cherki is in the pocket here. Doku finds him. This is too easy for City to just penetrate Newcastle time and time again. This is a lovely ball by Diaz. Doku in the pocket. Finds Foden. In my opinion, this is a penalty. Another really good attack. Foden receiving it under pressure. Gets away from Barnes, I believe that is. Switches to Doku. Nico's going to hit this underlap. If I can get my arrow, there we go. Nico's going to hit the underlap. As with those games against Liverpool, Bournemouth, you see the rotations with Doku and Nico and City go to their 2-3-5 shape. This is fantastic by O'Reilly and Doku also. Haaland has to score here. It's too central, as Voltemada did in the match. The two strikers hitting it way too centrally here, and Nick Pope is able to make a pretty basic save in the end. Even when the gaps weren't too vast for Newcastle, City was still able to exploit them. Foden's pass here, once again, breaking Newcastle's midfield, falls to Haaland. That's another dangerous situation for Newcastle. Going back to what I was saying earlier about City's off-ball setup to perhaps try to force Newcastle to go down their left, the opposite of that Liverpool game, we can sort of see it here. So Haaland is picking up Fior here. Foden, as soon as that ball goes into Schär, is going to charge at him. Schär, like Konate did against Liverpool, punts it away. City win the ball back immediately. And Diaz did this a lot in the game. Like, his passes in this game were actually really, really spot on for the most part. And I guess it's essential for your centre-backs to be able to do that if you're going to take one of those players in Foden and not have him be the bridge and have him be some more in the pockets, generally speaking, throughout this match. This is lovely by City, and this is arguably the best move of the entire match. I think Foden makes the correct decision by running with it, playing it to Shirky. Shirky makes the correct decision to play it back to Foden. And yeah, this is an abysmal miss. That has to be a goal 10 times out of 10. That is an unacceptable miss. And unfortunately for City, there were far too many unacceptable misses in the game. I've already shown you that earlier Haaland one. This is another one. Doku into Haaland. Take it around Nick Pope. Nick Pope has committed himself. He's going to Haaland's right because he knows that Haaland wants to shoot with his left foot. You've got to dribble around him and go to the right, and they've just got an open net. Haaland panics, rushes the finish, and it's such a shame because that was very early in the game. That was all just in the first half as well. We'll get into Newcastle's chances. It could have been like 4 goals apiece for both Newcastle and City. It was absolutely insane. The good chances continued for City in the second half. This is a really good ball by Shirky into Bernardo. It's not an easy chance, but it is inside the box, and I have seen Bernardo convert chances like that before, so that's a decent chance. This is I think a much better chance, in fairness. Doku has, of course, occupied Livramento, but Tonali is also concerned with him. So look at all this lovely space for our left central midfielder to pick up. That comes to Foden, picks his head up, sees that Haaland is there at the back post. This is a really good cross, and Haaland's got to do a lot better with this. He just heads it straight into the ground, and it's so easy for Pope that nowhere near enough questions were being asked of Newcastle's goalkeeper. So many chances for City in the game. The reason why I'm not going to focus on this as the main problem and concern for City, and I guess just the game generally, I did feel that City were not bad in this game. This was very similar, in my opinion, to the Aston Villa game. I felt that maybe a draw would have been a fairer reflection of both teams' performances. I don't think City played badly by any means overall, and the reason why I'm not concerned about the poor finishing in the match, and in isolation, it was appalling, inexcusable, but City the top scorers in the Premier League this season. We know that goal scoring for City isn't a problem. This is a really weird game. Like it's quote one of those with City in front of goal. Haaland's not going to miss that many chances again, likewise with Foden. Let's now move on to the second main topic I want to discuss this video, and that is Newcastle's fantastic work off the ball, forcing City into a number of errors, and also City's lackluster build-up. This is something that we have been seeing on a consistent basis across the season so far, minus perhaps the Liverpool and Bournemouth game, where I felt that perhaps City have cracked the code. Unfortunately, that may have been a bit of a false dawn. There are still a lot of structural concerns for City. It started as early as 30 seconds, but the long and short of it was that City weren't able to actually get a foothold in the game unless they were in the middle of the pitch, where Newcastle's press was far more passive, but when it was more so in the first phase, the earlier phases of play, it was a consistent struggle in that first half. We know that Newcastle press really aggressively and high when their opponents are in that earlier phase. It also didn't help that City were sloppy generally in the game, even under little to no pressure. Lots of passes just going astray, very atypical of City, that absolutely aggravated the issue. Nevertheless, those structural issues did still exist. Happens as early as the 30th second. This is very reminiscent of that Trafford pass against Spurs, where Trafford plays a pass that is just absolutely not on. He's obviously trying to find Foden here. He's playing it with his left foot, his weaker foot. But actually, if Donnarumma is able to play the ball to Foden's left foot, then there is a world where Foden can then do a reverse ball into Nico and they bypass the press. I think that's what they're trying to go for, but instead Donnarumma's pass is really bad and it actually is far too central. It goes to Foden's right, and from there, I have no idea how Barnes doesn't actually end up scoring here. City should have been 1-0 down within the first 30 seconds. Again, it really reminded me of that Trafford one against Spurs. Newcastle committing loads of bodies forwards, as I've outlined in the tactical preview. They do this a lot, and they've been doing it all season from opposition goal kicks. They know that City struggle to retain possession after goal kicks, and here Guardiola just ends up punting it long. That was a key theme for City. Same sequence, City win the ball back a minute or so later, less than a minute later in fact, and we just give the ball back immediately, leads to Nico, who should have got a yellow card. There were a number of players who should have got a yellow card. I believe that Nico was one of them there. Now this is much better from Donnarumma, and this is much better from City generally. Newcastle are going man-to-man here with their pressing, so Joelinton is on Foden, and Bruno G is on Nico G. So what Foden and Nico do here is they split wide, because that means that their pressers are going to follow them. So Joelinton's going to follow Foden, go to City's right. Bruno G is going to follow Nico G, go to City's left. That, of course, creates a really nice passing avenue in the centre. Donnarumma spots it, and this is a fantastic ball by Donnarumma. This is lovely. Into Doku, he turns, City are now away. That is much better. But there were too many examples where it wasn't good enough. This is maybe the moment that I'm the most upset about from City build-up wise. You can see Guardiola's pointing here, because he knows that he needs to have that ball played in front of him where he's pointing. Why? Because if the ball is played in front of him there, then that means that Voltemade is irrelevant. He's been bypassed. Guardiola can surge through the centre. City easily able to get into their normal settled shape and attack Newcastle. It's quite a simple pass. The pass goes behind Guardiola. So that means Guardiola has to back off and receive it. By the time he receives the ball, Voltemade is now very, very relevant. He's putting Guardiola under pressure. Guardiola now can't go through the centre because of Voltemade, so he's got to go out wide, and we know that City are far weaker at building up when we go out wide. So we lose it through O'Reilly that time. Eventually it comes back to this situation, and I've no idea how Barnes has not scored that. There were a lot of bad misses in this game, and that might be the worst of the lot. That was absolutely obscene that it didn't go in, but it stemmed from City not being good enough at building out from the back. This is a concern that we've been seeing all season. When teams come on to us in the first phase, as Newcastle did on Saturday, it's going to be a problem for City to try to establish a proper, secure foothold in the game. And that whole exchange really reminded me of that goal we conceded against Burnley. It was very, very similar, where we can't build out centrally, so we go wide, we end up losing it out wide, and then it results in a really good chance for Burnley. In that case, they were able to score. Here, Newcastle weren't quite able to do that. In the second half, Pep was seemingly just as frustrated as I was in respect of City's build-up, perhaps the number of chances we were conceding from that as well, and also the negative momentum that was being established by consistently losing the ball and giving it away, not having that foothold in the game. So Pep changed it at half-time. It was essentially a straight swap, with Bernardo now leading the press with Haaland when City went to their diamond shape and their forwards two in the press. And then when it was more to a 4-3-3 or that 4-1-4-1, it was what we are used to seeing, or rather what we have been used to seeing over the past few games. And this, I believe, is a far better structure off ball and on ball. It means that Foden and Cherki are now not interfering with one another. It also means that Foden is going to be a more useful asset in that build-up. And in that second half, very few instances I could identify where the build-up was a consistent problem for City, and I do think that was the case. In the first half, if you look at Foden's touch map, hardly any in the centre of his own half, hardly any deep. Second half, it's a very different story, far more touches in deeper phases of build-up. Here's like one such example. So Foden receives it here, first time ball into Doku, Doku plays in Haaland, and you've just got to applaud the challenge made by Arthur here, because how many times have we seen Haaland score a goal from this position? He's got to get it right, otherwise it is a penalty, and it is absolutely... It's a wonderful challenge by Theo. Newcastle did defend really well at times in the match. We've seen build-up issues with City this season. We've also seen out-of-possession issues this season. I've already touched on how City against Newcastle did what they did against Liverpool in respect of the diamond when Newcastle were in their earlier phases. It was just Haaland and Foden being swapped around. So that was literally all the difference was. Foden and Haaland's positioning was different, and then off ball, it was the same, but Foden was right of centre rather than left of centre. We forced Newcastle to go down the left, or tried to force them to go down the left quite a bit, but generally speaking, Newcastle weren't as fazed with this approach as Liverpool were. There's another example where that's going to be more relevant, but let's just have a general chat about what was City's pressing scheme like against Newcastle. Reckless is the word I would use. It's actually been more measured the past couple games. This was not one of those games. And I wonder whether that was because Pep and City were concerned with Newcastle's athletic, physical, and yet still very technically gifted midfield. Perhaps they wanted to counter-press them immediately, so they just couldn't progress the ball via the carry and maraud through the centre instead. So perhaps the idea was to try to mitigate the strength of Newcastle's midfield by counter-pressing with a lot of intensity. Unfortunately, Newcastle were able to bypass it far too easily, far too often, and it just was a hindrance to City ultimately. This is from a throw-in. I don't really get what Doku's positioning is there. I'm so sorry. I've not been able to figure out what is the point of him being there. This gets City into a really awkward defensive structure. It's annoying because the first 10 minutes, City were actually really good, apart from that opening mistake. First 10 minutes, City were fantastic. It sort of lost their way a little bit with their off-ball work, certainly. So Bernardo hit. So Doku should be here, and then Haaland should be here, and then Shirky should be over here. But for some reason, Bernardo's over here. So that's technically my left central midfielder for the purposes of this setup. Bernardo goes diving in, gets nutmegged, beaten far too easily. Nico Gonzalez then goes charging in, beaten too easily by the pass. Nico O'Reilly then goes charging in, beaten far too easily. So City's entire left pressing chain has just been incredibly reckless and bypassed far too easily, whether it's a pass through their legs or just a pass around them. Not good enough from Bernardo or Nico or O'Reilly. And I'm still not really sure about Doku's positioning here either. The other thing about positioning is that Foden should be at right central midfield here, so he should be being tasked with dealing with Joelinton, I suppose, over here. But because the entire left side of City has had to engage, or rather it has engaged over there, that's meant that Foden's had to fill the gap that has been vacated. The other thing I want to note is let's pay attention to Shirky's positioning, because the right side right now is barren. I'm not someone, and rather I am someone, who's consistently defended Shirky's off-ball work rate. I don't for 1 second believe that he's a lazy presser or a bad presser or a proper liability off-ball so long as you use him right. I can't really excuse a lot of what he did in this game though. Shirky's offering nothing. If we just go back a second, once it gets here and once it's very evident and there's so many City bodies already pulled over to the left, Shirky's offering nothing by being over on this left side. Once he realises that he should be over here because a switch is about to happen, there's no urgency, and it's very unusual because I'd argue this is the first time I've ever seen it happen. What I want my technical right winger there, I suppose, to do is get back to support his right back, especially given the context of that left out of possession chain that I just outlined. Instead, he's just watching it. He's still not in frame here, and Nunes is now in an impossible position where Barnes and Lewis are just going to run riot because he's outnumbered 2v1. He needs his right wing partner to come and assist him. By the time Shirky comes into frame, it's too late. Comes to Hall. Thankfully, Bernardo's there to intercept it, but that could have very easily been a Tonali goal only 11 minutes in. Not enough pressure on the ball from Doku and O'Reilly here. Cross comes in. You've got to put pressure on the ball when you know that Voltemada is the opposition's number 9. Forces Donnarumma into a save. Thankfully, Voltemada also hits it too centrally as well. Donnarumma saved. This is that diamond shape that I touched on earlier. Foden going to the right. The difference was, I guess, with Liverpool, and maybe the reason why it worked against Liverpool works less so against Newcastle, was Newcastle stretched the pitch as much as possible, and they made the pitch as big as possible also. Liverpool, on the other hand, wanted to drop a few more bodies back, wanted to try to build up slowly but surely. Still ends up going long a lot of times, but still, they didn't necessarily stretch City as much as Newcastle did. Newcastle more than happy to go direct and leave huge gaps, because if there are huge gaps for Newcastle, then it means that City likewise are going to be stretched thin with this structure. So they just go direct, and there's not enough pressure on the ball because look at how stretched City are. City also gave the ball away a little bit too much. Still got lots of City players in the pockets. This is perhaps not the best ball by Diaz. It's a challenging one anyway, but Shirky opts to try this very challenging little flick. I like the idea, but the execution isn't there. Nico, as before, goes diving in, gets the timing wrong, and now all of a sudden Newcastle have a 4v3. I've no idea what happens here with Diaz and Guardiola. The communication is just not there. Thankfully, Nico O'Reilly does well to get back, closes the angle down, Voltemada goes central, Donnarumma is able to save it. City lose the ball here. This leads to another fantastic chance for Newcastle. I don't know whether it was a Bernardo underhit or Doku just wasn't quite able to get to it. I think it's technically a Bernardo underhit here. Either way, giving away the ball, and Newcastle, they just want to make this a basketball game. They want to go up the pitch as quickly and directly as possible. Why wouldn't you? Foden does do well to get back. Nico O'Reilly does not do well enough to close down the cross. For me, this is Donnarumma's best save of the match. This is the one save where I'm like, okay, that is a properly great save here. You can say that perhaps Voltemada should have done better, but I'm really impressed with how quickly Donnarumma got down to defend the low portion of his goal. I think that's a really good save by Donnarumma. City could have very easily conceded a number of goals throughout the game, and we're in the second half now. Those defensive concerns from giving away the ball just sloppily were present in the first half, but also the second half. This is the first Newcastle goal. No idea why it took 63 minutes for a goal to be scored in this game. I don't get what Nico O'Reilly is doing here, because what he should be doing, surely, play it back to Donnarumma. Worst case scenario, Donnarumma punts it out and then Newcastle's defenders get it or Nick Pope gets it, and fine, you can get to a settled defensive shape. Instead, he just plays a blind clearance back into the danger zone, and we know that inherently Newcastle's midfield is far superior to City's, re second balls, loose balls, physicality. So it's unlikely we're going to win the second ball battle there. That's what happens. Comes to Joelinton, and it's the same thing. A sloppy pass, and then reckless pressing. Nico charges in onto Joelinton and Bruno Guimaraes. You got to give Bruno massive, massive credit here. Like, it's fantastic the way he's able to evade Nico. And also Barnes here. The way he's able to hold on to it, push Diaz away, hold him off, waits for Bruno G. And it is fantastic work between the two of them. And this is an absolutely gorgeous finish. But that was a perfect reflection of all the problems the City had in the game. A really odd, sloppy ball by a City player, followed by a naive attempt at counter-pressing, and perhaps we just don't have the facilities to do that against a team like Newcastle. And then City get back into the game, and then second goal, a few minutes after City do get back into the game, it's a mess. Like, this is a joke of a shot. Like, we just horrendously misjudged the corner. Gvardiol's had to cleared it off his line, but then we're not able to recover from this chaotic situation, and unfortunately Newcastle get the goal, which ultimately wins them the game. City made some changes, and for the life of me, I cannot understand any of those changes. The only one that I liked was Reinders for Bernardo as a concept. There is no doubt that none of the subs that came on performed even close to semi-competent. And that is, of course, on the individual players. At the same time, you know that you're going to be playing a low block for the final 15, 20 minutes of the match because Newcastle have taken the lead for the second time. There's only a few minutes left. Why are you taking off Foden, Shirky, and Doku? Some of our best threats against low blocks where space is at a premium and you need chance creators. Savio at left wing is incredibly one-dimensional. I don't think these are players that you bring on given that context. Congratulations to Newcastle, who played very well in the game. Massive revelation with Hall and Livramento coming back. That was going to be key for Newcastle in this game, and so it came to pass. I thought both of them were very good off-ball and on-ball. In conclusion, what are my thoughts? I felt that a draw was maybe the fairest reflection. People are going to focus on the bad finishing, and that's not incorrect to do because City should have scored a number of goals in the first half and the second half. But if you're a Newcastle fan, they can go, whoa, hang on. We also should have scored a fair few goals. It's very rare we're going to see City get 4, 5, 6 great chances to score and not convert a single one of them and miss all of those tap-ins and gilt-edged chances. But it is a concern, Ari build-up, and it is a concern, Ari out of possession, because that is a problem that we've been seeing all season. This is not the time to throw the baby out with the bathwater. City were very good going forwards. There were lots of good ideas in the match. I don't think City played badly, ultimately, and I don't think there were as many bad performances as people online are trying to suggest. I fundamentally disagree that this midfield, whether it's Bernardo, Foden, Nico, I disagree that was like a bad midfield selection. The Shirky one, he did disappoint me off ball, but just focusing on the centre for a second, because people said, oh, we're too lightweight in the middle, that sort of thing. But we weren't too lightweight against Bournemouth, and we weren't too lightweight against Liverpool. This is a side, a starting 11, that can work. We've seen other sides do that as well. Barcelona go to St James's Park and have an absolutely wonderful time. You don't have to have a midfield of monsters to win the midfield battle. Unfortunately, we just weren't technically good enough with the sloppiness of the passes. And then when you're technically not good enough, then it becomes a physical battle with loose touches. And of course, we were never going to win that. That was the video. Really hope you enjoyed it. It was a long one. If you made it this far, leave a like on the video. If you want to go the extra mile and help support me directly, there are 2 ways you can do that. You can join the Patreon, link is in the video description, or you can click that join button to become a member of the channel. The Patreon has ad-free viewing. The YouTube membership has more online live benefits. Both come with exclusive videos, so feel free to check that out. Shout out to all of my beautiful supporters across those platforms, in particular the highest tier supporters on Patreon and the YouTube membership: Tony, Spartacus, Silver Splits the Blue, Ethan Larios, Austin King, and Rowan.